What's up, everybody? This is Mr. Second Passport. Today, we're going to cover 16 tips that I wish someone told me before I bought my first car here in Ecuador. I've actually bought 3 and sold 3. I'm currently without a car now for over a year because I just haven't felt the need for one, but I do plan on getting one probably within the next few months, right? But it's way different buying a car down here than maybe you're used to in the States, right? And we're going to cover that today. Some things you should know before you buy, right? So just to start off, as a foreigner here, you can buy, just like land, you can buy a car as well with just your passport, right? So it's no big deal, and you have to do a notarized contract, and you have to register the car in your name with the DMV here, which is the ANT, and it's a pretty straightforward process actually. But here's a few things you should know. Number one, this is huge, and this is going to tick you off. Okay, do not buy, whatever you do, an automatic car in Ecuador. Go stick. Do like the locals do, okay? They don't buy automatics. And why should you not as well? Well, I as well, just like all warm-blooded North Americans, drove automatics back in North America, right? But you move here, driving stick, it's really easy to learn. And if you knew once in your life, it'll come back to you just like riding a bike. I guarantee you, it's no big deal. And the reason you don't want to own an automatic in Ecuador is because, one, the resale value. It's really hard to resell at a decent price an automatic car, right? Because locals just don't want them. And the reason they don't want them is because the parts are way more expensive to fix here in Ecuador. Right? The transmission, if it breaks on automatic, you're looking at thousands of dollars to replace here in Ecuador. But to replace the transmission of a manual stick car, a few $100 maybe. It could be for a lot of model types. So that's the reason Ecuadorians don't like automatics. And honestly, I don't recommend it at all here in Ecuador. Just drive stick. It's fun. Like my friend back in the States used to say when I asked him why he drove stick, in an automatic country, he said, it just feels like you're driving. And it feels more like you're driving. And it's true. When you're used to driving stick, going to an automatic kind of feels kind of lame, right? It's something to think about. It's something to get used to. Number 2, resist the urge. I see a lot of expats doing this, and I try to talk them out of it, but they don't listen. People are going to do what they're going to do, I guess, right? They think they're smarter than you. That's fine. Okay, good for them. But do not buy resist the urge to buy a Chinese-made vehicle with a Chinese brand on it. Why? Yes, it's true. They have some really nice looking cars these days. You can get way cheaper down here than the more name brand cars. But, okay, why should you resist the urge to buy a Chinese car in Ecuador? The resale value. These things depreciate faster than a falling rock when you buy them. Okay, whereas name brand cars in Ecuador, as most people know who've ever bought and sold cars in Ecuador, they really hold their value. You might lose about $1,000 of equity a year on a lot of models. So I mean, it's you lose a lot of equity really fast. High depreciation on Chinese models. Number 2, they're much harder to resell. The resale value is much lower, much more difficult to resell a Chinese-made vehicle. 3, I know a lot of people buy the Chinese cars because, it's a Mitsubishi engine or something or a Japanese-made engine. I don't know. Do you really trust it just because it says Mitsubishi on it? That's my opinion on that, right? I don't know if I would trust that. The parts can be difficult to come by, and if you do buy a Chinese-made vehicle from a dealership, chances are it's going to be far from where you live, because there's just not many of them, and then you have to travel a long way every time you want service done on the vehicle, right? And number 3, make sure you don't buy an ex-taxi in Ecuador. How can you know if a car was a taxi or not, right? And they just didn't paint over it. You can tell on the matricula and the license and registration of the vehicle. You can tell if you go back and see the history of the domain. There's a few different documents you can look at to make sure that it wasn't a taxi before. Number 4, this is very common here. You're going to see a car that you really like, that has a great price, and this is going to happen. Do not ever, under any circumstances, buy from a private reseller with a blank contract, or as they say down here, contrato en blanco. I've seen bad stuff happen, and there's really these people just disappear once they sell you the car. So, I mean, what happens down here a lot are people make a living from buying cars, usually at auction or at car fairs, and not registering in their name, but turning around and trying to resell them with a blank contract from the previous owner to the new owner. And problems can arise here. And then that previous owner is way out of the picture, and the person who just sold to you is not even on any documents, and they're out of the picture too. It's just not a good situation, and it's super common in Ecuador that people want to sell you with a blank contract, and just don't do it. Just skip it. To my 5th tip, there are big car fairs where it's just this huge parking lot of cars for sale that people gather on the outskirts of the big cities in Ecuador, and it's like hundreds of cars, and you can walk around, and oftentimes the owner's right there, and you can bid right there with for the deal. But I don't recommend buying this way. I've been to a couple car fairs. It's kind of a waste of time walking around, seeing what's available. 1 and 2, just on the internet, you can cover so much more ground. And 3, these car fairs, thieves can be about, and I've seen it happen where they will clone the VIN number of a car and then paste it to another car that may be stolen or something, and then register that. And then if you buy the car, believe it or not, I've seen this happen, then you'll go to try to register that car, and according to the DMV, that car just was registered to someone else, right? So these kind of things can happen in these car fairs and cars that are in car fairs. So just avoid them. 6, avoid the temptation. Now, I like them, but avoid the temptation in a place like Ecuador of buying European-made cars, and any luxury car for that matter. Why should you, unless you have a whole lot of money and a lot of patience? Because of the parts. The parts can be super expensive to obtain when things break, and sometimes they can be simply unattainable, and you have to order from the original factory way back in Europe somewhere, and it could be a month or 2 with your car sitting there not being able to run, waiting for this part. So availability and price, affordability of parts are a big reason why most locals steer away from European cars, and I suggest that you do as well. Which leads me to number 7. You should avoid Ford cars in Ecuador. Hear me out. Before a certain year, I was told, but I forget, by a car mechanic here, it's like 2011 or something, Fords in Ecuador were assembled in a plant in Venezuela. Well, that plant has since closed, and now whenever an older Ford here in Ecuador, like before that year, needs a new part, they have to custom order it from the plant in the US, and it's super expensive, can take a heck of a long time to get to Ecuador. It's a big hassle, big problem. And for Fords newer than that, right, you don't have that problem, it's true, but Fords in Ecuador, just the parts in general, are very expensive. And from what I've heard from other people that have had like the big Ford F-150 and stuff, they just seems to present mechanical problems here in Ecuador, and they're more pricey and difficult to fix. But buying an electric car in Ecuador would be pretty silly. Ecuador is still at least 5 years away from being electrical car compatible, in my opinion. But hybrids, right? There's a lot of hybrids here, especially the Toyota Prius is pretty popular in Ecuador. But I would not buy them in Ecuador because most people who sell these in Ecuador, I've seen, are ones who cunningly want to unload the hybrid right before the fuel cell dies, right? And so you're buying a car that, and in Ecuador, that fuel cell can be several $1,000s. That you're buying a car you think at a good price, and then bam, the fuel cell dies on you. Number 9, the disclosure laws in Ecuador are obviously not as enforceable as they are in a place like maybe the U.S. So you always want to check extra close that a car hasn't been crashed, and you can do that with an expert who knows cars just by raising the car up, and in a few seconds they can see by the welding if there's been any significant crashes to the vehicle. It's a very common practice here, as I mentioned before, for people to just dial back the kilometers on the car. So make sure you have an expert check out the car and put the car up to really give it a good look over before buying, because don't trust the kilometer always in the car. And if it's too good to be true, it might be too good to be true, the kilometer based on the year of the car, etc. Number 10, the plate matters in Ecuador. Believe it or not, the license plate matters. A car from the highlands, particularly with a P or Pichincha or Quito license plate, the first letter of the plate is the first letter of the province where the car is from. And cars with a P or Pichincha from Quito, in other words, are worth more than cars from the coast. A lot more often, several $1,000s sometimes. Maybe you're looking for a car, it's happened to us all, and you see a super cheap car based on the make and model and year from what you're seeing, say, in the highlands in Cuenca or Quito. But if it's a coastal car, I would shy away. I would shy away from it. I have seen coastal cars where you pop the hood and it's all rusted out because of that ocean air if it's spent a lot of time next to the ocean. So that's something that people are generally worried about. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But just that plate devalues the car a lot and makes the resale much more difficult. 11, another tip that I learned the hard way: don't travel long distances to look at a car in Ecuador. Try to stick to your immediate areas. It's just not worth it. There's almost always something that'll be like, no, I don't want that car. So, I mean, don't travel too far, 2-3 hours max. But even I have done that, and I felt kind of like an idiot when I traveled that far to see one car, and for some reason, it was a no-go. Number 12 tip: what to buy. What brands of car to buy in Ecuador? Super cheap, super available parts, easy to get. Chevrolet, number 1. Kia and Hyundai, which Kia and Hyundai are basically the same, probably made from the same plant and everything, Korean. Kia, Hyundai, and number 1 for sure is Chevrolet. Super cheap, available parts, super good resellable value here. Everyone wants one. The locals want one. Would be very easy for you to turn around and resell it for close to what you paid for it if you paid about market value. Tip number 13, don't buy models of cars that are no longer in production, which happens a lot in Ecuador. Or because that car is no longer new, you can no longer get that car new, and parts are going to be difficult. 14, this is the tip. This is where I screwed up on one of my 3 car purchases, thinking I was smart. So Ecuador, the consumer is not as protected here as the States. And some cars, even of name brands like Chevrolet, some name have some models that don't exist in the US because no one would buy them. But they look good on the surface and they drive fine when you take your test drive right around the parking lot or whatever. But the motor is too small for the vehicle. And when you try to go up hills, especially with a loaded car, you're not even going to be able to get up the hill. Like I bought an N300. It's like a minivan type thing, Chevrolet N300. Had like a 1.2 cc engine, which is fine for a small car, but not for a car that size. I discovered once I bought the car. It was a huge problem for me, and I ended up selling it. But don't pay attention to the size of the motor before you buy a car here in Ecuador. Number 15, don't buy a car on loan, please, even if you're offered one. There's a lot of hidden print in the loans in Ecuador, and I've met a lot of people with car loans in Ecuador that when you break it down, they don't even know how much interest they're paying, but when you actually sit down and do the math with them, like I did with one person, they were paying 16% interest, right? And it's just an absurd amount of interest to pay, and that's what they're gonna nab you with down here, even with the secured car loan. So something to think about. Don't get one even if you're offered. Number 16, this happened to me as well, actually. Unfortunately, be wary of scams. And the scams can be sitting right in malls in Ecuador. Kind of pose as working for one of the big name brands, but they might even have it in their name, but they're not. And it's kind of like they pose as kind of like a low cost financing way to get a car. And that's what I thought it was. Happened when I first got to Ecuador. I ended up paying like $600 or $700 to get in the program, but what I didn't know is that I was basically entering like a payment plan or a raffle type thing, and I couldn't get the car for like a couple months until my name came out, and I had to keep paying in the meantime before I got the car, and I just tried to withdraw and I couldn't get my money back anymore. It was just gone. Big problem. So yeah, these types of programs are usually sitting right there in the center of malls in Ecuador, and just stay away from any kind of financing plans in Ecuador.